Hi, my name is David Bose. I am the Director of Communications and Marketing for Washington Policy Center, and you have just tuned in to Washington Policy on the Go. We took a bit of a break because of our annual dinner event in Spokane, but we are back to our every other week presentation. And today we'll be visited by Elizabeth Hovde. She's going to talk about some interesting moves by some governors recently to try to make more jobs available to high school graduates and make it more possible for young people to avoid crippling college debt. We'll talk about that in a minute or so. Then we're hoping to be joined by Todd Myers. He has a different engagement here for a few minutes, but we're expecting him to join us at about 12:20 or so. And then we'll talk about salmon recovery with Todd. I want to give people a chance to tune in. We've been gone for a couple of weeks, so we've got to get people back used to getting back on board. I want to remind you, you can ask a question at any time during the broadcast. Just go down to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or the side of your screen, depending on how you have Zoom set up, and you can type in your question there. And I do try and incorporate them in our conversation. We try and get to all those questions, so feel free to ask whatever you want. If you do have multiple questions, it's possible we won't get to all of them, but as long as they're on different topics and are relatable, I do try to make sure that we get to as many as we possibly can, even if you have more than one. So with that, I want to let you know we do welcome those questions. And we might take another break next month during our annual dinner event in Bellevue, which is coming up October 13th. For those of you who haven't heard, we have Dr. Sebastian Gorka coming to talk about national security, and then our keynote address from the minds of the Babylon Bee, the guys Seth Dillon and Kyle Mann, who created and spearheaded the Babylon Bee. That's the satire site that has kind of taken the world by storm, really kind of replaced The Onion as the go-to source for satire for people. And I think in part because they don't have the sacred cows, ironically, because it started as kind of the Christian satire website. But they're the ones that they take on all comers. They point out the hypocrisy of the dominant culture and news and other things. So basically everybody now knows who the Babylon Bee is, and they just keep producing extraordinarily funny material that's also biting politically. And they've been banned from Twitter and other things, and famously had an interview with Elon Musk where he let them have their Twitter account back, and they gave him an IOU for, I forget what it was, like $1 billion or something great like that. All right, we've got our participants. We're ready to go. Let's bring Elizabeth Hovde, our Center for Healthcare Director, on, and Center for Worker Rights Director as well. Elizabeth, let me start first before we get into the interesting moves by a couple of different governors regarding the removal of mandates for college graduate requirements for state jobs. Let's talk first about this story in The Stranger that showed up against you, accusing you of hypocrisy because you don't support the Walk Cares Act. The column is reminiscent of stories. Todd Myers gave me, I think, the best one, which was Reggie Jackson telling another player who was getting booed on a regular basis everywhere he went. He said they don't boo people who don't matter, and I think that that's the same here. They're not going to write about you as the ultimate hypocrite unless you mattered. So I just wanted you to kind of share. You had a catastrophic skiing accident, which is what they bring up, where you were hospitalized for a period of time, and they say if you experience this, then you must support the Washington Care Act. Otherwise, you're just a hypocrite because you needed health care and it was there for you, but other people are going to be left to die if you don't. What's your overall reaction to that as far as your own healthcare experience goes?
I think it's awesome that people keep putting me down, which gives me an opportunity to talk about how government safety nets are put in place for people in need. Taxpayers are generous, and we need to protect and strengthen those safety nets, not create new social programs for people who are not in need. So my healthcare experience have only strengthened that view. It came up a few times when I wrote for the Oregonian. People would bring it up, and say, oh, I bet you've changed your mind about healthcare. And I'm like, no, it just got stronger that we need to do this, that we need to protect people in need. So it's nice to be given an opportunity to talk about the weaknesses of the WA Cares Fund. There are numerous weaknesses, and it's not going to help people in need. People in need would already be qualifying for Medicaid, which is a safety net for people in need. What it's doing is making low-income workers give money over to people with more resources and who might not need taxpayer help and give their money away for a benefit they may never benefit from. So it's discouraging that people aren't seeing this. There's been so much marketing for WA Cares that I think it's blinded people who have good intentions that this is hurting low-income workers.
Yeah, it's a bizarre thing because what they tried to set up was this black and white choice, as though there's two choices in life. There's either WA Cares or destitution and suffering, lingering death with no health care for people. And I mean, I've seen this before where people get used to this idea that there's only two choices. There's two sides to the coin, so to speak, forgetting that there's all kinds of alternatives and other approaches out there that are also available to approach this particular issue. But the way the stranger sets up their argument is, if you don't support this one and you don't support the way it's set up right now, then you're a horrible hypocrite to care. What was it? Healthcare for me, but not healthcare for thee was the way that was set up. If you were to make,
I don't get the hypocrisy charge at all. I'm all for people helping people when they get hurt with GoFundMe's, or I was helped through a 5K that people ran and came and saw me, and that was very kind and helped me get through some.
I would totally have done that for you, but I'd need medical assistance myself after the 5K. So I need a long warning to warm up for that one. Yeah.
And the stranger conveniently leaves out the fact that I purchased health insurance. I had that in place, and that's the message I think that's being lost too. This is kind of confused because long-term care is really meant for people in the end of life. That's what it was created for. We have a graying population, blah, blah, blah. I had a disability situation, which could have been helped through disability safety nets. It's kind of confusing, but the reality is there are many reasons you won't qualify for WA Cares. And at the time, I had been working self-employed for 5 years. I would not have been able to use WA Cares in my situation. And I don't see the hypocrisy. I'm all for people helping other people, and I'm all for safety nets helping people. So I don't get it.
Well, you don't see it because it's not there. I mean, but I think a headline that said, Elizabeth Hovde is wrong about her opinion on WA Cares is not nearly as exciting as, right-wing pundit is hypocritical, because everybody loves a good hypocrisy tale, that, get the moral standing falling down and all that kind of thing. That's much more fun than a mere disagreement on policy, which is really what it all boils down to. And you can see that over and over again.
And I'll use it, if they want to talk about WA Cares and say that I'm a greedy individual because I don't want people to have it, I'm happy to bring up the issue and point out how low-income workers are harmed by this fund. They're not winning with this fund.
I noticed they called your concern for low-income workers and others disingenuous, but didn't address the numerous calls Washington Policy Center has made to have across the board sales tax cuts, which sales tax cut has not been cut since 1982. The state has record spending. We've had record revenue several years in a row now. And despite all of that, and despite inflationary pressures and other things, we just can't shake the powers that be into thinking that people deserve a break, and that since the state's collecting more money, maybe giving some back here would alleviate some of that. And by the way, that would immediately benefit the people who need it the most. Right. But they don't care.
And when a Democrat proposes it as legislation, we've seen it ignored by the party. It doesn't make any sense. If we have a regressive state and tax world, let's address it. That's a great way. Sales tax is something you can control, while CARES fund is regressive. You can't control it. You're forced to pay it if you work. It's a penalty on doing work. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's taking place in the midst of, high inflationary times. Grocery bills are extremely high, the rest, and then your idea is, okay, well, now let's institute a payroll tax, which is,
Right.
it's pretty obtuse when you think about how people are struggling right now. I mean, I like to listen to what people's concerns are, when I'm out and about at checkout lines or whatever, and I mean, I hear it time and again, people fretting over their grocery bills and what they can purchase and what they can't. And it's not just the pricing, of course, it's the packaging too, because the things that they're purchasing are smaller than they used to be, and people aren't fooled by that anymore because it's gotten so small. Anyway, let's turn to some positive news, which is you pointed out that there was an experiment by, I think it was Governor Hogan that you pointed to first, where they basically stepped up to the plate and said, you know what, we've got this requirement on state jobs that if you want to apply, you have to have a college degree. And somebody came up with the observation that actually you don't have to, the college degree doesn't mean anything. You could easily have people learn these jobs without that college degree. Why don't we just remove that so that more people are eligible for these jobs and have an opportunity to excel with on-the-job training and get these jobs and move forward. And now, a second state has done that. Kind of describe how this process unfolded and how it impacts people.
A bunch of states have actually done it. In 2022, I believe, Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland began this trend, and Jared Polis of Colorado followed up. There have been a handful of other governors going this direction.
So a Republican and a Democrat. So it's a bipartisan approach.
Yeah, it's a bipartisan reform effort. In January of this year, Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, for his first full day of office, he decided to end the college degree requirement on the jobs, and more than 90% of all the government jobs in Pennsylvania, or about 65,000 positions, have been made available to applicants regardless of college status. There are some jobs that require or can benefit from a college degree. There is no reason to take someone's skill and experience and not value it the same way we do a piece of paper. So I think it's fabulous that states are following the private sector and looking for ways to open up jobs to qualified applicants who simply lack a college degree, saving them tons of debt in the process in some cases, and being a benefit for the best talent for the state.
I just talked to a young fellow who was looking into following his dad's approach, and his dad's a filmmaker, and he said, I said, well, are you thinking about college? And he says, well, I feel like I would just go into the college is so expensive. You're looking at $60,000 a year, and I can learn everything there for less than $10,000 at a trade, function, and I can learn on the job. And I just thought, it's an amazing world where there's several people online, many of whom are extremely wealthy, that keep pointing out that there's almost nothing you can't learn online. There's just so many different courses and classes and other things. And I'm not saying I don't value interaction between your peers and professors, but you can do that. You could do that at a seminar. You could do that on a limited basis elsewhere. There's a lot of things you can learn just from the click of a mouse and the exchange of relatively small amounts of money. Nothing compared to what kids are being asked to pay right now, and parents.
And apprenticeships, internships, on-the-job experience, and just the time invested. I went to school for journalism and political science. I graduated. I enjoyed my experience. But it wasn't until I started working for a newspaper that I learned the ins and outs of newspaper, really adhering to AP style, which you did in college too. But the newspaper was where I learned most of what I would do there. Yeah. So I do think it's possible to open up many, many jobs, and state government is a great place to start. I was looking at various jobs in our state. we have staff shortages everywhere, and yet we have these job postings that are limiting the working pool. We're limiting our hires, our potential hires, and it's a shame.
That's a great point. I didn't think it. Where is Washington along the spectrum? We likely have the college graduate requirement on most state jobs, I think.
I don't know the percentage of how many do and don't. I know so many of them, Tacoma News Tribune story pointed out, require associate degrees instead. But when I was looking through the job listings, I found things like being a L&I, what's it called, a services specialist with L&I to evaluate people re-entering the workforce if they were injured, was requiring a college degree. And that is just one example of many that are out there that don't seem to lend themselves to a college education training program versus what you would just learn on the job or through experience like that.
I love this trend because I think that this trend will help reinforce a message of choice in schools, even at lower levels, because people are going to start thinking outside the traditional box. And it's hard because I find myself even thinking about my own kids, what college they going to go to. I got to get them in college. And then I kind of take a step back and think, now, wait a second, just because I felt that way. And just because that was kind of how it was when I was younger, for certain kinds of jobs, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it is right now.
No, it's a new economy.
It is.
The cost of college is crazy in some cases, and the value of a degree is questionable. We have people who are just not as beholden to that. And I think a lot of us need to get over the path we're used to and the trajectory we're used to, and being open to the other things that our economy is demanding.
Yeah, and when you think about what is available to learn out there, I mean, Google has their own classes, Amazon has their own classes. There's all kinds of both high tech and last time I wanted to fix my car, I went on YouTube and typed in, how do I fix this? And there was several really well done videos of people who know their stuff showing how to fix, the parts of your car. So
on the job training is so valuable, right? And we learn to show up there, and we learn to be teammates there. I mean, there's just so much value in our skills and experience. They're often overlooked and rule us out of a job we'd be completely qualified for.
That's funny. We just in the chat, we just had individuals say devaluing college degrees is not sensible to me, and I'm not devaluing a college degree. I found value. I'm a graduate from Hillsdale College. I thought that was a valuable experience, and I think the most important thing about college is at least in the humanities, is learning how to think, not what to think, and so that you can apply, your learning to any situation throughout the rest of your life. I think there's certain degrees, especially in science and engineering, where you're gonna need a more college focused approach. But when colleges, I just looked up a college the other day that was commanding $60,000 to $65,000 a year, and their average graduate is getting a job for $30,000 to $35,000 a year, and with the upside potential being very slow. In other words, they're not people that are entering the workforce at 35,000 and then in 4 years they're going to be up to 120. They're staying low because there's just a glut on the market and there's not much there. And there's no reason for that. That's just a heavy burden on students, and the rest of us keep being asked to pay for it because it's exceedingly more difficult for them to pay. But government is guaranteeing the loans, so there's no downward pressure on colleges to cut the expenses. They're like a hiring factory for left-wing activists. So at least that's how I look at it.
I totally hear that concern that you say is in chat. But I don't think this is devaluing college. It's opening up the value of other kinds of experience for certain jobs. Certain jobs will benefit from college. Other jobs will benefit from experience and skills, and some will benefit from both. I think it's just important to not create barriers to work that are artificial.
Follow-up question. Many state programs currently fund education as a program to low income, I think might be a typo here, it's a program to low income residents, such as food benefits, unemployment retraining, displaced homemakers. Will such programs still be funded if government doesn't require degrees? What is the role of community college and workforce development in this case? You know, I mean, I don't think we have all the answers there, but if you want to go first, I'll throw my 2 cents in as the non-researcher among us. After
Go
you.
ahead first or read me the
Okay.
first part of that question again.
Okay, here's many state programs currently fund education as a program to low-income residents, such as food benefits, unemployment retraining, displaced homemakers. Will such programs still be funded if government doesn't require degrees? What's the role of community college and workforce development in this case? And the point here is that they're removing college requirements from state job. You can't apply for a state job in some cases unless you have a college degree. And they're saying, unless the college degree is actually needed, like for an engineering job or something, they're taking that requirement out so that you can apply for that job. I would think that if anything, the role of community college and workforce training might expand, or other forms of non-traditional, super expensive educational programs might expand, so that people in the situations that this individual is talking about could apply for more jobs.
We also might see the cost of college stabilizing, right? If not, if people are making other choices and they're weighing them, it might be a factor that helps get college cost under control. And I also think when you show up to that job, just because you weren't required to have a college degree requirement, you might not be selected. There might be a better applicant there with skills, experience, and college degree, but it allows people to go after those jobs. And I think a lot of people are deterred from seeking jobs when it says there must be a college degree.
Photobomb.
Sorry.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Heidi. She asks, can you explain if anyone enters the workforce from now on, do they have to participate in walk cares, or can they get an exemption before they become employed?
They cannot. The exemptions are not possible for anyone who came after 2021 into the workforce. So it's not possible, even if you buy a private long-term care insurance program or policy on your own, it's not possible.
Here's an attendee who writes, as a socialist, I completely agree with what you've said about the inaccessibility of job listings, especially for state jobs. We need the state to stop limiting who they are hiring. How can we balance the need for private market jobs, tech, and the need to fill state public jobs? I'm not quite sure of the problem there. I mean, the market kind of determines that. You apply for the jobs that you're available for, and then balance the need for private market jobs and the need to fill state jobs. I don't think you want the state to be competing with the private market as much. I think some people think the state needs to expand forevermore. I think, where possible, you want the private sector to be expanding, and that's what pays for everything else.
It's interesting that a Harvard Business School report talked about this dynamic too, that in the private sector, I think it went down. College degree requiring jobs in the private sector went down, I think, from 51% to 44%, don't quote me, between 2017 and 21. And I think it is just that acknowledgement that there are many ways to gain valuable experience in our economy today. And I think it's a good move.
Well, Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining us on Washington Policy on the Go today. I know that you've got another appointment coming up that you're preparing for. And so your work is never done, as hypocritical as you are.
I know. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you bet. I always appreciate it. Now let's turn to Todd Myers. He is our Center for the Environment Director. Todd has a new report coming up about salmon recovery, which is always a plus. Let's see. Todd, are you able to join us?
I am. My camera is not working, which may be to the benefit of our viewers.
So it's like the Waylon Jennings, you've got you can't get your face on TV, but that's okay. I just wanted to give a sneak preview on your study coming out about salmon recovery and the challenges that the state faces, particularly because while Washington State on a regular basis talks about prioritizing salmon recovery, what I find fascinating about your work is over and over again you point out that it's really not a priority, or it's not a big priority, that there are other things that are put above salmon recovery, including politics. Why don't you briefly explain how you found politics interfering with science when it comes to salmon recovery, and what the overall situation is for the salmon recovery in our state?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. There's a couple of clear ways that politics has intervened. What we have seen overall with salmon recovery is that populations are not increasing, especially of Chinook, which is the primary species we look at, but we look at other things like steelhead and coho. But among Chinook, populations have really not recovered. And while a lot of people fixate on the Snake River, the fact is that in Puget Sound, some populations over the last 15, 20 years have actually declined. So we're really not making the progress that we want to. That is creating frustration, understandable frustration. I'm frustrated about our approach. And so in that frustration, we have seen a couple of trends. One is people look for silver bullet solutions, right? Spending $35-40 billion to tear down dams is a silver bullet solution, right? People expect that it will, save the fish on the Snake River, or do other things like that. And then the second thing is that it encourages politicians to engage on these issues and make decisions and replace scientific prioritization with political prioritization, because people are saying, hey, we need to do something. And they each have their favorite area to focus, whether it's stream side buffers and cool streams, or whether it's estuaries, or whether it's forest management, other things like that. Everybody has their favorite thing. And so what they do is that they go and they pound on the door of their legislature and say, you need to focus on this. And so that gets politicians engaged. And then the other thing is that people in identity politics, which is infecting everything, is infecting salmon recovery. So we have a law called the HEAL Act, which is about environmental justice. And environmental justice means that we're supposed to focus our efforts where there are traditionally marginalized communities. But it is overtly an anti-scientific approach, because what it says is, it doesn't matter where the science says that you should focus salmon recovery. We want you to focus it where there are these traditionally marginalized communities. And that's very clear because based on the map, there's what's called a disparities map, health disparities map, that is primarily urban areas. Spending lots and lots of money on urban areas does very little for salmon recovery, because most of the low-hanging fruit, most of the areas where we can spend money and do good work that I think is important, and money I support spending, is not in those areas. It is in rural areas primarily, or even in some suburban areas where you can get more bang for your buck in terms of salmon populations. And so what ends up happening is that the HEAL Act and these other identity politics driven approaches undermine science and undermine salmon recovery by taking resources away from where they would be most effective. So that's the trend that we have seen, and it threatens to undermine the work that we are already doing. As slow as we are going right now, we are looking to spend money in places that will have even less benefit. And that is the absolutely wrong direction.
Yeah, it really ticks me off, because you think, it's kind of like when schools that are failing, self-identified as failing, and for various reasons, test scores show kids aren't learning anywhere near what they should. And then there's some kind of 10-year plan put together. And in the meantime, generation after generation of kid is graduating from a subpar school, or not finishing school at all, and they're left with all the social consequences of that. And the big focus is on, but we got to save this particular system, this particular district, or whatever it is, instead of looking at what the primary purpose was, which was educate kids. In this case, it's the salmon, It's like, hey, salmon are dying out, and we need to find ways to bring them back for all kinds of different reasons, but also to pass on to future generations. And instead of focusing on what actually brings salmon back and putting your limited resources there, we decide, hey, let's put our limited resources to other places that won't really have this impact but make us feel better. It's just wildly inexcusable to me.
Well, and to be fair, people are starting to recognize that the HEAL Act and some of these other identity politics approaches are undermining the science of salmon. So I'm on the Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council. It was proposed by the staff at the Puget Sound Partnership that for grants, for science-based grants for salmon recovery, that we would add 10 free points to any group that represented a traditionally marginalized community. Well, I don't know how you qualify for that, right? What does it mean to be, truly representing that organization, or whether you just, call yourself that.
Sure.
But clearly the goal was to sideline science and add this element of identity politics. And that, like I said, that would tend to shift projects away from where they are most effective to, places where spending wouldn't have much of an impact. Now people are recognizing it. And so I pointed this out. I argued that we should not do this because we need to keep our eyes on scientific prioritization. And if we want to improve that prioritization, great, but it should always be based on science. And after I made that argument, the first person who spoke up at the Salmon Recovery Council was the representative of the Nisqually Indian tribe, saying that he agreed with me. And the next person who spoke up was a representative of the Northwest Indian Fisheries, saying he agreed with me. Why? Because tribes care about recovery, right? They want more fish. It is part of their economy. It is part of their traditional lifestyle. It is important for many reasons. And if we start playing games with the money and we don't recover salmon, they see the direct harm. So people are recognizing that these games are not scientific, that they actually harm the environment. And so I think there's a good opportunity to fight back. And the fact that we have worked with tribes, the fact that I am supportive of doing what we can to improve salmon recovery means that, groups who might disagree with us on other things will back us up when we have that focus on science.
It'd be nice too if the staff, of an organization that in its title is defined as salmon recovery, that they would be reminded of their primary purpose, their primary function. Because just to suggest that, hey, let's dilute the science in terms of what will actually save salmon so that we satisfy a political need over here, just the suggestion alone shows a lack of understanding of the stakes involved and what their priorities should be, to me.
Well, I think, to be fair, the staff is trying to implement bad law.
Right.
It is the legislators who
Yeah, good
passed this, who patted themselves on the back for being, committed to environmental justice, when in fact the law was very clearly going to sideline science in favor of identity politics. And in fact, the author of the HEAL Act, Senator Saldana, soon after it was passed, gave a speech at the University of Washington online. And so I tuned in and I asked her this specific question and said, okay, so if the law says that that we should focus on giving, resources to urban areas where they would basically have no benefit to salmon, or very little in terms of bang for the buck, I shouldn't say no benefit, but it would be very expensive for the benefit they provide. Why should we do that? And she talked for, I would say, 10 minutes and said nothing, because the reality is there is no way to square that circle. She knows that the HEAL Act steals money from scientific priorities to constituent groups that she likes, and there is no way around that. And that is the wrong approach for the environment. You can say that that's good for those constituent groups, but you have to also acknowledge that it's bad for the environment.
This reminds me of how people need to be careful of language, like environmental justice. Who's going to say no to that, right? Sounds great. You control the language, you control the debate. But when you switch that around and say diluting science, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that's not what I want to do when it comes to saving the salmon. So, kudos to you, Todd, for showing what the reality was and going beyond the political language to get to the truth of what was really happening there.
Well, and I think one purpose of that political language is to bully people into agreeing with it, right?
Totally, yeah.
Who could possibly disagree with environmental justice? Well, our job at the Policy Center is not to play little word games. Our job is to see what the impact of the policies are. If salmon recovery is important, then we need to focus on whether it is successful. When we start playing little word games, what we show is that salmon recovery or climate change or other things are just sort of political tools to make ourselves feel good. And that is the problem that we constantly highlight. And I think the HEAL Act is a fantastic example of where the words and the feelings are more important than the results and are actually undermining the results. So, nobody else, I strongly believe that nobody else would have stood up and said, this is bad, if we had not. Once we expressed that, then others were willing to weigh in and say, yes, I have these same concerns. But our goal, our purpose in a lot of these discussions is be the first person to say that uncomfortable truth that other people are thinking. And I find again and again that we have more allies than people would realize, than would typically think, in a blue state like Washington, where people, don't agree with us on some issues. But when we speak the truth and when we say these things, others say, yes, I get it. That's correct. That's the wrong way to go.
Do you find yourself, after all these years, do you find yourself hopeful for salmon recovery in Washington State, or do you feel like we're sliding in the opposite direction?
Depends on the day you ask me. Look, we killed that policy. That is no longer going to be part of the grant program. Those free 10 points are no longer going to be part of the grant program. That's awesome, right? That gives me confidence that we can focus in other areas. I can tell you that I have talked with people inside the Inslee administration about these issues, and they say quietly, but they still say, yes, Todd, we agree with you. That's important, right? Those people in small and sometimes big ways will make a difference and prevent bad policies. There are other days where you see really ridiculous statements from the governor and articles in the press that are really frustrating, that make me feel the other way. But it is a constant battle. We are there on the front lines doing it. And I will say it's not all doom and gloom. There are victories that we can take credit for and feel proud of.
And Todd, I know your study's coming out next week. We'll be releasing that early next week on salmon recovery and the state of salmon recovery in Washington State. And I'm sure we'll be touching on that again. But before I let you go, there is a question that we've dealt with before, but it's a little off topic. It's regarding the legislation that Governor Inslee wanted to require oil companies to provide transparency on their prices. The question is, what's the status and the likelihood that it passes?
So that he and Senator Wynn, who is the chair of the Senate Environmental Committee, are offering that legislation in January during the next session. So that's where they are on that. California has a similar law that they have in place, but this is fundamentally dishonest, because the governor's justification for this is that in Washington State, oil companies are making more profit here than they are almost anywhere else in the country. That is completely false. The source that he cites for that is called the Oil Price Information Service, OPIS. And the data that he cites is not about oil companies. It is about gas stations like Safeway, Costco, other things like that. And second, it is not profit. It is the markup from wholesale to retail. And out of that markup, places like Costco, Safeway, and other gas stations have to pay all their costs, credit card costs, labor costs, property taxes, maintenance, everything else. So his justification for saying we need this transparency is based on an absolute lie. So, will it pass? A lot of dishonest things have passed in the past in Washington State. So I don't know whether it will or not, but fundamentally the justification for it is dishonest.
All right. Well, thanks, Todd. And I look forward to talking with you more about salmon recovery once the study is released. And always appreciate your work. I should add that the project, was it Project 42 and Americans for Prosperity, that gas station stunt they did using your work the other day? It was really fascinating in Kent, where they brought down the costs of gasoline at a couple of stations for 2 hours or so, just to show people what the difference is in Washington State versus the national average, and highlighting that information in a real tangible way. You had hundreds of people lining up for gas. That was I loved seeing that in action, seeing your work in action out there, and again, forcing the politicians that keep saying that there's no cost. Well, now they're saying they never said there was no cost, but until this point saying, that there's no cost associated with this cap and trade tax, they're being forced to eat their own words. And I like it. I like what I'm seeing there.
Yeah, there was a funny story that came out of that, where they were talking to people who were in line, because of course there were lots of people in line to get cheap gas. And one of the guys said, I actually support higher taxes on gasoline, and yet here I am getting low cost gasoline. so there's, I think people, when they are confronted with the reality of the situation, acknowledge that there is a problem. Unfortunately, the only person continuing to deny that there is a problem sits in the governor's mansion.
Yeah, people, it's kind of like when people are asked, do you want something, unless you have the follow-up, like, just use the example of a waiter or waitress, how they'll walk up and say, would you like some appetizer? Would you like this? Would you like that? Unless you know the price, it'd be easy to say, yeah, sure, I'll have everything if somebody else is paying. But, if you find out the appetizer's about the same cost as your meal, you might say, you know what, I can do without that today, so the cost matters. So appreciate that, Todd. Real quickly, Gary asked me a question: why no info about Barry Weiss no longer being a speaker at the Bellevue dinner? Well, of course, the reason for that is because our focus is now on the annual dinner speakers, the Babylon Bee, the Minds of the Babylon Bee. Kyle Mann and Seth Dillon will be there. And we're trying to reschedule Barry for a different day. So the focus is on who we do have coming, not on who we don't have coming. And so if you want tickets to the annual dinner, go to WPCdinner.com and you can get our speaker details there. We also posted a really funny string of Babylon Bee material on our YouTube channel. If you go to the Washington Policy Center channel, they sent us a little comedy reel, and some of the stuff is very funny. So I would encourage you to check that video out, give you an idea of the Babylon Bee and their comedy there. So I appreciate that. Anyway, we will be back with you in 2 weeks, and that'll bring us right up to the final lead-in to our annual dinner. So looking forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, thanks to Todd Myers, thanks to Elizabeth Hovde, and thanks to you for tuning in to Washington Policy on the Go.